Ragnar Lothbrok was killed off in Vikings Season 4, breaking a rare TV show rule. The Vikings' Ragnar execution by being thrown into a pit of poisonous snakes was directly adapted from the Viking sagas, and it was required for the show to move on and concentrate on his sons. However, Ragnar actually planned his own demise within the show, which turned out to be his biggest triumph. Ragnar Lothbrok was first introduced as a simple farmer in Vikings Season 1. But his wanderlust inspired him to sail west and command raids on England. Along the way, he made enemies, and it was by overcoming them that Ragnar rose to become the Earl of Kattegat and then a king. After such a rise, however, Ragnar's demise was revealed in Vikings Season 4. He became addicted to drugs, lost miserably in the Second Siege of Paris, and vanished from Kattegat for a long time. There is no better time to reflect on Ragnar Lothbrok's passing than as Vikings. Valhalla enters its second season and his legacy is made clear in the spin-off. Ragnar was no longer capable of conquering anything when he went back to Kattegat. Being an old man with a weakened body and a damaged reputation, he was forced to resort to digging up his hoard of treasure, which he should have been saving for his afterlife in Valhalla, to bribe a crew of raiders to sail with him to England. Ragnar arrived at his destination without any allies other than his handicapped son Ivar the Boneless because a storm sank his ships. Although he didn't appear to pose much of a threat, Ragnar's death in the Vikings gave the character the chance to cause more harm to England than ever before. It was part of a larger and bolder strategy, in his own words. In Vikings, how does Ragnar pass away? Given that Ragnar had been the series' primary protagonist up until that point, the death of Ragnar in Vikings was one of the most shocking events of Season 4 and the entire series overall. Ragnar Lothbrok's demise was probably inevitable given his propensity for fighting and conquest, but the intentionality of Ragnar's death and the gruesome manner in which he died add to the shock. Ragnar raided Francia to exact revenge on his brother after Rollo betrayed him by staying in Paris, but he was soundly and shamefully defeated. Ragnar then left his native Kattegat upon his return to Scandinavia to live in seclusion as a result of this humiliation. Ragnar unquestionably changed during this time, which lasted for several years. He emerged weaker and angry that his golden age appeared to have come to an end. When faced with the prospect of a life in decline, Ragnar chose to forge a path to ruin instead, which led to the demise of Ragnar Lothbrok. Returning to England, Ragnar presented himself to King Ecgbert at Wessex and was taken prisoner by Ecgbert, who later handed Ragnar over to King L. Ragnar endured days of torture at the hands of L, who eventually killed him by plunging him into a pit of poisonous snakes. There are many stories about the real-life Ragnar Lothbrok's death, but this is undoubtedly one of the most graphic. Ragnar's death on Vikings was shocking to viewers because of how violent and unexpected it was, but it was also a fascinating moment because of how carefully Ragnar had planned out the entire incident. Before dying, Ragnar converted to atheism. The fact that Ragnar's religious foundation was extremely shaky by the time of his death in Season 4 is one of the keys to understanding the Vikings' Ragnar death. The gods themselves were among the many things Ragnar questioned because of his inquisitive mind. As exemplified by the friendship between Ragnar and his cherished friend, Athelstan, the conflict between the Norse pantheon and Christianity had been a major theme of Vikings from the beginning. The clash of religions in the lives of the two characters was met with very different responses. After being captured, Athelstan struggled to reconcile his affinity for the Vikings and their gods with his upbringing as a Christian, his years spent as a monk, and his Christian upbringing. Prior to his conversion to Christianity shortly before Ragnar Lothbrok's death, he was never able to fully decide between the Norse religion and Christianity. The more Ragnar was exposed to Athelstan's religion, however, the more he appeared to question the very existence of the gods. But he understood that the gods, whether they were real or not, had influence over people, and he started taking advantage of that. In the third season of Vikings, Ragnar pretended to have converted to Christianity and requested baptism during the first siege of Paris. Then, after faking his death so that his coffin could be carried into the center of the city for a Christian burial, he made a dramatic exit and let his army loose on Paris. Ragnar had converted his belief in the gods to his own self-belief after Athelstan's passing. Ragnar saw the gates of Valhalla closing to him as he was healing from the wounds he sustained in Paris. This could be read as him simply not being prepared to die yet, but it could also be seen as Ragnar losing faith in Valhalla at that point. Ragnar expressed his lack of faith in the Kattegat seer's prophecies in Vikings Season 4, saying that they were ambiguous, contradictory, and self-fulfilling. "I don't believe in the existence of gods," Ragnar said to the seer. "Not the gods, but man controls his own destiny. Man created the gods to provide answers that they are too afraid to provide for themselves." Ragnar was no longer willing to believe that the gods had already predetermined how he would die at the end of his life. Instead, he bragged with pride about how he created his own fate and decided how he would die. Ragnar was prepared to die. It was obvious that Ragnar Lothbrok's passing was on his own mind the moment he arrived back in Kattegat following the time jump in Vikings Season 4. Later, he admitted to King Egbert that death has been on my mind a lot. First, Ragnar dared his sons to kill him and take his place as king, but they declined. Then, in homage to the myth of Odin hanging himself from the Yggdrasil tree, he hanged himself from a tree. Ragnar Lothbrok of the Vikings sought death in a different way by traveling back to England after the rope eventually snapped and saved his life. He came up with a strategy to ensure his son's success and notoriety while putting his enemies to the sword. He took the time to make peace with Floki and say goodbye to all of his loved ones before he left, showing that he had no intention of ever returning. Why King should carry out Ragnar's death sentence. Ragnar Lothbrok's demise was primarily intended to prepare the way for the abolition of both King Egbert and King. Ragnar and Elle had never been in a romantic relationship, but they had a lot of respect for one another because of their similar personalities and devotion to Athelstan. Even so, Ragnar Lothbrok, a Viking, was unable to pass away without preparing retaliation for the long-ago massacre of the Viking settlement. To get Egbert to turn him over to and release Ivar, he deceived Egbert into thinking that this crime had been absolved, but in reality, he told Ivar to exact revenge on them both. But Ragnar Lothbrok's demise was not just a case of simple retaliation. He asked the seer what would happen to his sons in Vikings Season 2, and was told that they would become more famous than him. Ragnar, in particular, saw greatness in Ivar, telling his youngest son that his crippled legs had given him a fortitude that his brothers lacked. Ivar the Boneless received his final lesson from Ragnar Lothbrok, who stressed that people would always underestimate him because of his legs, just as Ragnar's enemies did when he appeared to be nothing more than a frail old man in rags. Ragnar made the decision to decide what would happen to his sons because he thought he had made his own fate. He gave them the drive to avenge his death, and he gave them the rallying cry they would need to form the vast army of heathens. In order to assemble a pitiful raiding crew, Ragnar had to spend every last scrap of gold he had in his lifetime. However, after his death, Ragnar Lothbrok rose to fame as a legendary Viking who could bring the people of the North together and set his sons on the path to success. His influence can still be felt in Vikings, Valhalla, the results of Ragnar's plan after his passing. Despite his fame and his prowess as an explorer, Ragnar's military successes were actually fairly meager. He organized successful surprise attacks on Northumbria, but when he first led an army into Wessex, King Egbert's use of Roman military strategies resulted in his defeat. During the first siege of Paris opening battle, he was brutally and expensively defeated once more. During the second siege of Paris, he was defeated twice, and he returned home a broken man. As his sons Bjorn, Hvitserk, Sigurd, and Ivar waged war with a gathered army of thousands, Ragnar Lothbrok's death in Season 4 wreaked havoc on the nation, despite the fact that he made little progress in conquering England during his life. Particularly, Ivar showed himself to be a far superior military tactician than his father. Ivar used cunning to deceive King Egbert's army and draw them into a chokehold, forcing Egbert's family to flee and abandon him to his fate. Bjorn had initially led the victory against Kingel with pure brute force, while Egbert was given permission to die by cutting his own wrists, was brutally killed when Bjorn performed the Blood Eagle ritual on him. After getting Ragnar's vengeance, his sons were able to conquer York, establishing a stronghold there and using Ivar's tactics to thwart Saxon attempts to retake it. In the Vikings television series, it was frequently stated that Ragnar's real goal was to settle England and give his people a home. He was finally able to accomplish this through the meticulous planning of his own demise. Whether Valhalla exists or not, and regardless of whether Ragnar visited it, he left a lasting legacy through his sons, which allowed him to continue living even after death. Naturally, that legacy veered off course in Vikings Season 5 when his sons began quarreling. But Ragnar isn't really to blame for that. How Ragnar Lothbrok actually passed away. The Vikings television series was based on the legendary Norse king Ragnar Lothbrok, who is immortalized in Icelandic myths that describe his conquests of England and other lands before being ultimately vanquished by Kingl and thrown into a pit of snakes, just like in Ragnar Lothbrok's death scene. Sadly, there is scant evidence to suggest that Ragnar, the Vikings, was a real person. History suggests that Ragnar was actually a composite of 3 different historical figures: King Horaki of Denmark, King Reginfrid, and Reginhurus, though evidence does support the existence of his sons, most notably Ivar the Boneless. King Reginfrid probably perished in battle, while the real King Horik was ultimately assassinated by his brother Guttorm. Although little is known about Reginhurus' demise, many people think he was simply put to death after losing a battle. It is understandable why Vikings Season 4 chose to focus on the legend rather than the reality, since none of these deaths are even close to being as famous as the legends surrounding Ragnar's. What other roles did Travis Fimmel play after Ragnar Lothbrok? Travis Fimmel, who played Ragnar Lothbrok in Vikings had a distinguished career before that character's passing, but the History Channel historical drama is unquestionably what made him famous. After Vikings, Travis Fimmel played Caleb, Marcus in the Ridley Scott science fiction series Raised by Wolves, where he initially sided with the atheists in the conflict with the Mithraic cult before assuming the identity of a high-ranking Mithraic. He played Anderson on the series Dirty Black Bag after the program was cancelled. In the movie based on the well-known video game Warcraft, Travis Fimmel plays Anduin Lothar. He has made a variety of other film appearances, and his most recent project will see him take on the role of Fenton Preacher Lang in the upcoming Western Rust. Travis Fimmel has had a successful acting career since his character's demise on Vikings. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and support my channel.